Well, good afternoon. Today we heard very good news from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and the Government of Canada, joined in partnership with the provinces, including our own province of Ontario. Our city and cities across Canada have been on the forefront of fighting COVID-19, and that work has come at a financial cost to cities due to unprecedented demands for services and supports and unprecedented revenue losses for municipalities. We have been clear, for example, that Toronto alone is facing a $1.3 billion net shortfall, even after we have found more than $500 million in savings and efficiencies, knowing that we had a responsibility to address as significant a portion of our own problem as we could. The Safe Restart Agreement announced today by the Prime Minister provides much-needed federal and provincial emergency financial support to cities and specifically to transit systems like the TTC. We have worked hard to secure this commitment, working together with both the federal and provincial governments. I know firsthand that the negotiations have been challenging, not because of an unwillingness to help on the part of either order of government, but because Canada's governing structure often makes it difficult to determine who should be doing what. In the end, the two other orders of government came to an agreement that has them taking equitable financial responsibility for addressing some very significant financial challenges faced by cities and towns across Canada, including Canada's biggest city, the City of Toronto. I want to thank Prime Minister Trudeau, Deputy Prime Minister Freeland, Premier Doug Ford, and Finance Minister Rod Phillips for the unflagging efforts they all made to get a deal done. I was in touch with all of them on almost a continuous basis the last number of days, including last night and earlier today. And while there were moments throughout of frustration on all sides, staying power won out. And that will be good for all of our residents, good for Canadian cities, and that in turn will be good for Canada. Deputy Prime Minister Freeland and Premier Ford never gave up in their particular determination to fight for cities so that cities in turn can drive a strong recovery, and I thank the two of them in particular. Deputy Prime Minister Freeland once described Premier Ford as her therapist, and I'm not really sure in this whole exercise who was giving what therapy to who, but I do know in the end that the two of them never gave up on the cities and towns across Canada, the municipalities who need help and who need it now. Je tiens à remercier le Premier ministre Trudeau, le Vice-Premier ministre Freeland et le Premier ministre Ford d'avoir travaillé ensemble pour parvenir à cet accord. En investissant dans les villes et les transports en commun, par exemple, ils rendront les villes canadiennes plus fortes et plus aptes à mener une forte reprise pour tous les Canadiens. While we await further details as to the allocation of these funds to cities and towns across Ontario and indeed across Canada, I know Premier Ford is mindful of the size and of the scale that transit systems in Toronto and in the rest of the GTA and the tremendous damage that has been inflicted upon those very same transit systems by the pandemic. The same is true in the case of the important compassionate care we extended, and properly so, to homeless Torontonians and to those experiencing food insecurity. And I'm confident that those realities will cause the Premier and his government to ensure that Toronto's particular challenges are fairly addressed when the allocation of these funds is actually done. Obviously, the agreement and the funds which will follow will have a positive impact on the financial challenges outlined in the quarterly report we discussed earlier this week that came from the city's public service. How much good it does will depend on those allocations that I mentioned earlier. But I'm confident, I'm cautiously optimistic and confident that this announcement will be helpful within the context of our request for emergency relief funding. The report of the City Manager coming to Council later this month will discuss the positive impact of the federal provincial funding announced today and the challenges remaining before us, including in 2021, next budget year, when, for example, we still expect to be seeing reduced transit ridership levels. I also want to thank mayors from across the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area, and indeed mayors from across Ontario and across Canada, because they stood together, we all stood together for our cities and towns to protect our services and to protect our residents and to protect the businesses that are so important to the well-being of our economy in our entire country. I also want to thank my city colleagues here at Toronto City Hall who've shown a strong, united front when it comes to advocating for this financial help for cities, for the City of Toronto and for other cities and towns across Ontario and across Canada. This was about standing up for Toronto and standing up for the municipal order of government. And we stood strong together, and we will continue to stand strong together because we understand completely the important role that we play during pandemics and every single day of every single year in making sure we have a strong, prosperous country and a compassionate country that can care for our most vulnerable. Deputy Prime Minister Freeland is right. This is a big deal that includes the provinces and the territories and a recognition of the need to support cities and towns right across this country. It is absolutely the right thing to do, and it is my hope that once we review all of the details, it will be clear that this will ensure that our city is going to be in a much better position to support a strong recovery, both locally and nationally. The financial beneficiaries of this new investment will be the federal and provincial governments themselves as cities and towns drive that much-needed recovery. But the biggest winners will be the cities themselves, and more particularly the 80% of Canadians who live in them. This will help us as cities to support those people, those residents of ours, with good services and supports, compassionate help, rather than being entirely consumed with financial instability. Our commitment, led by Toronto, Canada's largest city and Canada's economic engine, will be to lead a solid, fair recovery which helps get people back to work and back to a normal, safe, and healthy life, which I think they all cherish to do. I'm now happy to take your questions.
Thanks, everybody. Just as a reminder, it's one question, one follow-up. First up, we have Matt Bingley from Globe and Mail. Global News. Go ahead, Matt.
You were close. Mayor Tory, I'm just wondering, when it comes to you said that you don't know the allocation of the funding yet, but how soon, when you have a report coming to council, how soon do you need to know from the province how much Toronto will get of that $7 billion?
Well, you could begin to do some very rough calculations, but for example, the transit money could be allocated in a number of different ways, based on population or otherwise, and it is really going to be the responsibility of the province to decide on a fair and equitable manner, and based on the needs, I assume, how that money will be allocated. So I'm optimistic that we will have a sufficient indication of that by the time the city manager's report has to be finalized, which is some days yet, and that as a result we'll be able to give the council some pretty good indication of how much help has come our way, which I think will do quite a bit to help alleviate the problems we've been outlining in recent weeks.
So quite a bit, but $7 billion obviously spread out with all the municipalities will go quite quick. Are you expecting the province to match some of these funds?
The province is matching these funds. For example, the entire transit fund across the country is set up on the basis that each province and the federal government will share 50-50 the amount that is going to go to the operating expenses or the operating shortfalls of the transit systems. And so I have a pretty good idea, because I was involved in the latter stages of the discussions, as to what the two governments are putting up for transit in the province of Ontario alone. And then Toronto, having the largest, by far, transit system in the province, I have some ideas to what portion of that we might expect, but I don't want to preempt discussions that are going to have to go on about that. And I'll just say, though, that I think the amounts in the case of the province of Ontario are going to be quite significant, and that's commensurate with the losses that we've experienced in revenues because of transit ridership being down so far during the pandemic and for some time to come.
Okay, next up we have Angelina King from CBC. Go ahead, Angelina.
Hi, thanks for taking questions. I know it can be difficult to say when we don't know the allocation. Just wondering if this might satisfy the shortfall. Do you think that there will still be service cuts and increases to property taxes to come?
I think this will go a long way, but again, until the allocations are done quite precisely and until we see all the sort of fine print, as it were, it's premature for me to declare victory. But I will just say this is a very solid step forward. And again, I want to say that Premier Ford and Deputy Prime Minister Freeland in particular never gave up on cities. There were some very difficult moments over the last number of months where people were frustrated with each other, and where the system of government of ours, as much as it works well, a lot of the time was frustrating itself. But they didn't give up, because I think they both understand and the power that cities have in Ontario and right across this country to drive the recovery and to support people the way they need to be supported in the aftermath, I hope, of a crisis that has been in front of us for some months now.
Aside from transit, anything else specific that the city would look to put the money to at this point?
Well, we will be the beneficiary of all of the different categories of help in the restart agreement, and that includes things ranging all the way from PPE through to general municipal expenditures and revenue shortfalls exclusive of transit, because transit is provided for on a separate basis. And so I just think it'll help us with a wide range of our problems and will hopefully go a long way to making sure that the kinds of cuts or tax increases that had been discussed will be minimized or perhaps eliminated. But we'll have to wait and see. And we've got a continuing effort we will make as a city to find ways in which we can also make our own financial picture better. We found $514 million in savings to date, but I've indicated that's a work in progress as well.
Okay, next up we have Stephanie Smythe from CB24. Go ahead, Steph.
Hi, Mayor. Sorry if I may just ask a question about the Toronto Blue Jays. Premier Ford, just in a news conference before you, announced that after discussions with the feds, the province, and the city, the medical officers of health, the Blue Jays have been given the clearance to play in Toronto, even if it's an empty stadium, the Premier said. So that means both countries. Wanted to get your take on this, and also the criticism that, some calling this ridiculous. The federal government should not have allowed this, over concerns about COVID.
Well, I can't be talking out of both sides of my mouth. I was urging the federal and provincial governments, and they were responsive partners to say yes to this in light of the fact that there is one of the most extensive protocols I've ever seen to provide for keeping people safe in the city of Toronto and all around the Rogers Centre, and to keeping the players safe, but keeping residents safe as well. And I believe that what has been done here by way of that very extensive document will make sure everybody is kept safe. And if that is the case, then I don't know why we wouldn't be happy to see our Blue Jays, Canada's team, Toronto's team, playing in their own home stadium. When Mark Shapiro first called me about this a couple of months ago, he made the point even back then that it looked like we might be the only team in Major League Baseball that wouldn't be able to play in its own home stadium. And that wouldn't have been the biggest issue in the world, but I think Torontonians, if they were presented with the fact that there's an extensive series of protocols here to protect everybody concerned, most particularly the residents of the City of Toronto and everywhere else, as well as the players, I think they would say that they're happy to see our Blue Jays playing and competing, I hope, to win in our own Rogers Centre Stadium here in Canada and here in Toronto.
So, Mayor, just as a follow-up, we're seeing with the NBA, there's some snitching going on already in Florida with them not complying with quarantine rules or having to give warnings. How can you assure there's going to be enough restrictions in place to keep the players in line?
My conversations with Mr. Shapiro, and he has had meetings with the Blue Jay players, and they in fact spoke at a meeting that was held the other day with the medical officers of health. Two of the players were there to say, look, we understand what's at stake here, and first and foremost, these are smart people, and they know that the health of Torontonians and the health of their fellow players and others is at stake, which I think they take as seriously as the rest of us do, but they also know their reputations, their competitive positioning, their livelihood is at stake beyond the health, which they place first and foremost. And so I'm very confident that this stereotype that is going to see all these people sort of running around partying or doing things they're not supposed to be doing will not take place, and that they're going to actually sacrifice a lot by having themselves confined largely when they're not out of town to the hotel premises, which is something that, they're well paid for what they do, but it is a period of some confinement they're going to have to go through, because the baseball season, as it's going to be in 2020, is going to be quite long relative to some of the other sports. So I have faith, and Mr. Shapiro gave me the confidence that the players are taking this seriously and that they understand that it is their fans here in Toronto that are the ones that are put at risk if they misbehave, and I just don't think they have any intention of doing that.
Okay, next up we have Francine from the Star. Go ahead, Francine.
Oh, hi, Mayor Tory. I wanted to ask you, in your opinion, is the deal too prescriptive?
Well, the federal government had several objectives in mind, and that's why it's called a restart agreement, not a cities agreement. And so, yes, it was meant to address the concerns of cities, and we got more deeply into it with respect to transit, which I'm very gratified for, because I think that's going to be very helpful to the big cities in the country that have big transit systems, including us. But there were other things they wanted to accomplish in terms of ensuring that we had a more robust effort at case and contact management, at PPE, and they wanted to support the provinces and through them, ultimately, I think the cities in some cases, to do that work and make sure that we're able to deal with those things as a country, to be better prepared to deal with this pandemic and what may come going forward. And so there were some limitations placed on how the money can be used, although I would say flexibility came into it more as time went on. And I think those were appropriate. And in the end, people agreed to it. So I guess everybody decided it wasn't too prescriptive because they signed on. And that's the main thing for me, is that everybody signed up here. We got a deal. And it's not perfect, but it's one that I think is going to help.
Thank you.
And last, we have Lucas Myers from News Talk 1010. Go ahead, Lucas.
Thanks, Lavin. Hi, everyone. Hi, Mayor. I had to step away from the call for a little bit, so I do apologize if this was asked, Mayor. But do you have a ballpark idea of exactly when the city will be informed of its exact allocation?
Well, I'm very hopeful that we will be informed in time to make sure that the City Council, which meets at the end of the month, which is just a couple of weeks from now, has a pretty clear idea on how much we're going to get from these two governments and from all the efforts that they put into reaching this agreement. And then it will give us a much better idea as to how to address the City Manager's report and the quarterly report we just saw with respect to measures we need to take to keep our budget balanced, which is, of course, what we're legally responsible for doing, but also what we want to do, while at the same time providing supports to Torontonians and the services they've come to rely on. So I hope we'll have some detail. I suspect it won't all be completely ironed out by the end of the month, but I think we'll have by then a pretty good idea.
And I believe, Mayor, you made some sort of reference on what you think the transit commitment would have to be. Can you just, and again, apologize if this was said before, but what do you think that number is on the transit side?
I will just tell you that to the best of my information, and I was quite involved in the latter stages of these discussions, we are talking for all the transit across the province of Ontario, billions of dollars, but it is divided up between all the different cities that have transit, and how that money gets divided up, of course, is a very important consideration in the context of who gets what. And but I think it will be beneficial to the big transit systems just because they're big and because they have big losses, and that applies to the municipalities across the GTA and in Ottawa and some of the other cities in Ontario. So I think it's going to be a big help. We'll know exactly how much help, I think, in the next short period of time.
That's it for today. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks very much.